Hello whisky fans, I wasn't going to do this video originally, but I thought it'd be rude not to do a little A-B comparison, a little head-to-head whisky off. So let's get things started and let's check out the nose on Elgin Classic Unpeated. So the nose on the unpeated whisky here is exactly what you would expect with your classic bourbon matured whisky. Getting lots of vanilla, caramel, honey, lots of sweet notes coming directly from those bourbon casks. It's a really nice nose. Must be said that it has got a little bit of a youthful note in there. Quite a bit of youth, if I'm being honest. And the fruitiness is a little bit of a slightly artificial fruitiness, but still very pleasant. Let's see, I'm going to keep this in my left hand, the unpeated whisky, and let's see how it compares to the peated. I'm getting, just as I had in the main review, lots of really heavy notes of like heavily smoked ham, smoked foods, and lots of acrid, dry, quite aggressive peatiness. If anyone out there has had a go at smoking their own food, you probably learnt, like I did, that you can actually go too far when you're smoking food. And I'm kind of getting a little note of that in this whisky. It's a little bit like when you have some nice food and you put some nice smoke into it, but you add a little bit too much and it drowns out the flavour of the food and you're just left with smokiness, and it can be a little bit too concentrated. And although the peat smoke in this one's not overwhelming, there's something a little bit concentrated and a little bit heavy-handed about it. I think it's probably, like I said in the review, that the base spirit doesn't quite stand up to the smoke. It doesn't quite go together as well as it could do. So between the two, the unpeated, I'm going to say it's a very nice whisky and it smells beautifully, but it does have that slight youthful note to it. Whereas with the peated whisky, you haven't got that youth at all. And at this point, I would say they seem like they're about the same age. But you do have to wonder if a lot of that is that peat, because one of the great things about peat in whisky, that it's not only stronger in a younger whisky, that peat does fade over the years, but if you have a young whisky that's a little bit rough around the edges, if you add some peat to it, it actually hides a lot of that youth, and I suspect that's probably what's happening between these two here. So let's try the palate. I'm just going to put the peated down, and let's try the palate on the unpeated Glen Moray. So again, the palate on the unpeated whisky, lovely sweet bourbonised single malt, and again it's got a lovely fruitiness, a little bit of an artificial fruitiness, and I'm going to say that the fruitiness you've got there's a lovely honeyed caramel sweetness to it, but the fruitiness is quite a pear fruitiness, and that pear note is something that's coming across to me as, again, a little bit of a youthful, spirity single malt, but I'm not going to mark it down in any way for that. I think it's a lovely tasting whisky. Let's try the palate on the peated Glen Moray. To start with, on the early palate, the peated Glen Moray is entirely different. Getting a big hit of lovely, sweet and spicy, peppery, spicy peat, and it's actually reminded me a little bit of the Wild Turkey Long Branch that I reviewed. And the Wild Turkey Long Branch is actually advertised as having a mesquite barbecue smoke flavour to it. I believe it's actually filtered through mesquite charcoal, and that peppery, sweet and spicy barbecue smokiness that I'm getting on the peated Glen Moray actually reminds me quite a bit of that spicy smokiness that I was getting in the Long Branch. After the peat fades from the peated Glen Moray, I think I mentioned in the main review that it then goes on to some rather nice coffee notes, dark coffee, and then finally onto some more malt and caramel notes. And late on the palate, they really pull together quite nicely. They really show the similarities late on the palate. So between the two on the palate, I really think it's quite even again, because the peated Glen Moray, it definitely adds a big dimension to the basic Glen Moray spirit with that peat smoke. It's really quite intense and really adds another dimension. It's really interesting, but I feel that it covers up a lot. On that arrival, you really don't get any of the base spirit coming through that smokiness. It's all peat. And then slightly sooner than I'd like, that peat fades away and you're left with half of the experience of the base spirit. So I really feel like it adds something, but it also takes something away. It's a little bit of a polarised whisky, and I'm actually tempted to say that it's not entirely as well integrated as it could be. As for the finish, I'm actually going to give that one to the Glen Moray unpeated, because I think that the finish is much better on that one. It's much more complex. I think the problem with the peated Glen Moray is that because you've got that intense explosion of peat that then fades away very quickly, it seems like you're left with far less towards the tail end of the experience. Although I do think that the fact that it gets so mild so quickly and disappears so quickly towards the late palate and towards the finish might also be that the Glen Moray Peated is a younger whisky than the unpeated, because as I said before, with a peated whisky you can get away with that age more so than you can with an unpeated malt. But I think towards the end of the palate you are starting to see that lack of complexity and lack of the length of finish probably does hint that this is a younger single malt. So, like I said in my reviews, I think this is pretty much a draw. It's a bit of a wash. So I think that either of these whiskies, if you can get them for around the £18-20 mark, both of them are worth your money. Don't expect to be blown away, but I've been really pleased with both of these two. And if I was looking for another basic, decent quality whisky, I'd buy either of them again. Let me know in the comments what you think of these head-to-head videos, and let me know what you think of peated whisky and what have your experiences been with trying peated versions of unpeated malts. Thanks for watching. Cheers.